Am I back off? I think you muted me, Adnan.
You're unmuted now.
You're back on.
I'm unmuted, good. Okay, so I will start again. So I'm Adrian Price. I'm the head of IT and telephony for integrated urgent care. My title suggests I'm purely technical, but that is actually not the case. I sit within the policy team of NHS England. I was responsible for the development of the 2017 IUC specification against which all 111 services are currently procured. And I'm here today on behalf of John Hutchison, for our head of policy, who is unfortunately unable to attend. So to give you a bit of background into the service, NHS 111, it was very much developed as a signposting service. So it was about signposting patients to an appropriate location of care. Since then, it's developed. We've got the online element that's now been developed as an alternative access channel, but we've also very much developed the offer that we provide with a much greater focus on achieving consultant complete, so taking the patient through to a referral endpoint, referring them through to a service, and if necessary booking them into that service, and also providing self-care advice where appropriate. And we have additional clinical input into the call to be able to do that. So we seek to close as many cases as we can with additional clinical input and providing self-care advice. Where we're unable to do so, we seek to refer those patients to the most appropriate location of care, booking those patients into those services. We've also become very much the front door to other NHS services. So, you know, the mantra being, if you don't know what to do, contact 111, and we will guide you into the most appropriate location of care. And we aim to link very closely with other areas of the NHS. So do you want to flick on to the next slide, please? Okay, so you may have heard of the initiative, the 111 First initiative, and it's primarily about making NHS 111 the place you call if you have an urgent emergency care need, and the principle was to reduce overcrowding within the EDs, to herald your presentation to the ED if you did need to go to an ED, but also to look to find an alternative location of care that could better meet your needs. In a lot of cases, urgent treatment centres or other similar constructs are able to just as well meet that patient's needs. And if your need is of a lower acuity, you'll actually likely be seen quicker if you're sent to a UTC than you would be if you went into an ED and you're sitting there. Waiting while higher acuity cases take priority in front of you. So it is both to the benefit of the system in terms of getting people into the most appropriate location of care, but also to the benefit of the patient, because we're ensuring that you as a patient get them at the most appropriate care and the quickest care that we can provide. So if you want to move on to the next one, please. Okay. So, our strategic objectives, we're looking to increase the visibility and usage of 111, through both the telephony and the online channel, and provide an alternative, as I say, to simply walking into ED. And in the future, it is very likely you will not be allowed to walk into an ED. You simply won't be allowed. At the moment, you are, and we have streaming tools at the front end of ED to stream patients that self-present, but in the future it's highly likely you won't be allowed to do that, and you'll have to access through and other means. Following the contact with 111, we look to offer alternatives, and the whole that we have the directory of service that contains location care information across England, and allows us to appropriately refer patients into the most appropriate location of care. Where hospitals care is required, we look to book those patients in. So we've got same day STEC and ED, or also, you know, even into a UTC. We look to book those patients into the UTC, and there's very clear evidence that booking a patient into a service, it gives them assurance that they have got, you know, a next step for their care. They're more likely to adhere to the advice that they're given if they're booked into that service than if they're just told to go to a certain location. So you know, the evidence suggests that it is really beneficial for the system and for the patient to be given that referral information. So when they're not being referred to non-hospital services, it was done effectively. The patient knows that they have a confirmed slot. So again, you know, effectively just echoing what I've just said. As I said, not my presentation, so apologies if I'm slightly hesitant on this. So do you want to flick on to the next slide? Okay, so we need to, I mean, I've covered this off already. We need to ensure that the patient's referred to the service that they do indeed attend. And we need to support this with the clear instructions and information. And those instructions and information are, you know, that's quite broad. So we need to tell the patient where the location of care is. We need to ensure that they're aware of the opening time, the relevant opening times of that location of care, any particular requirements when they arrive at that location of care. So there's quite a lot of information that we need to provide. We're providing them with an appointment or a booking slot, and you know, there are subtle differences, and Adnan will come on to, in terms of whether you tell somebody you arrive at 10 o'clock, it's an expectation, it's an appointment, and I expect that I will be serviced at that point of arrival, and I'll be out within the allotted time scale, or whether it is a slot. You know, I'm told to go in the morning, in the afternoon, or within you know, within certain time scales. And again, Adnan will come on to the details of that. And again, another thing that we think is particularly important is providing people textual and email confirmations that some of the information we provide is quite lengthy, and to relay it verbally to an individual who hasn't got the means of taking that down can again result in confusion. So having that information at hand on their smart device, their mobile phone, that they can look back at is a key requirement. Do you want to go on to the next slide? Okay, we're very keen to, you know, we've talked about channel access. Obviously, we've got online, we've got telephony. We do provide face-to-face services. We're also in promoting the use of video consultation. There's significant evidence that suggests that there are certain presented case types, such as, you know, where you have a child and the clinician is looking to assess the wellness of the child. That can be done better using video. We have we also have, you know, for example, the deaf and hard of hearing who you know, require textual means of communication. So we're looking at web chat as a method of communication, and we're piloting that. We're also piloting what we call native SMS, which, so at the moment you can communicate with us via SMS, but it's via the BT Text Relay Bureau, and that is you know, effectively it's an intermediary acting on your behalf, typing in what's said and relaying that information. Native SMS would be where the clinician or call handler is actually communicating directly with the patient via SMS, which is a requirement that the deaf and hard of hearing community have highlighted that they require. So a lot of work in terms of providing the appropriate access channels to our patients. Following access to NHS, we need to secure the patient pathway, and this is only possible if we have technical capability. So again, Adnan is going to come on to this, but the interoperability, you know, is absolutely key to us. When we send that referral through to the location of care, we need that location of care to be able to pick that information up, ingest it into their system. We need, where possible, for them to be able to pick up where we left off. So having to manually transcribe, cut and paste information across, or manually transcribe information from one system to another, introduces operational inefficiencies at the receiving end. Having to re-ask the questions that have already been asked and answers that have been ascertained on arrival to that place, again, presents a bad experience for the patient. So there's, again, Adnan will come on to this in more detail, but it's really key to us that we get that when the patient arrives, that location of care knows about the patient. They've got the key information they need about the patient to be able to continue the care with that patient. I don't think, just think, have we got any more slides? I don't think we have.
No. And Adrian, I think we've got Libby on the call, I'm hoping. And Libby, do you want to give some context about what you're doing around the pharmacy side?
Yeah, of course. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you see me and hear me? Perfect, even better. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Libby Pink. I've just recently rejoined the NHS England policy team, looking at all things around the digital strategy for community pharmacy. In community pharmacy currently, we have lots of live referral pathways. So we already have a live referral pathway from 111 into a community pharmacy for the Community Pharmacy Consultation Service, CPCS, for those that haven't heard about that. And that's for both the emergency supply of medicines and also it's for a minor illness consultation. We also have another stream of the CPCS, which is the GP CPCS. So that's a referral from general practice into community pharmacy, again, for that kind of minor illness consultation where appropriate. We also have a live referral pathway from secondary care into community pharmacy for the discharge medicine service, and that's an essential service that is provided by all community pharmacies. So absolutely critical, looking at what Adrian's just said around patient choice, and that ability to be able to send to any pharmacy of the patient's choice is really important for us. And we have a service that is about to be imminently launched, which again is a secondary care referral from secondary care into community pharmacy for a smoking cessation service. So not all pharmacies will necessarily be delivering that service, as it is an advanced service, but again, the referral pathway for us is really important, and that it is going to the pharmacy of the patient's choice. We are also running a current pilot that is looking at emergency department urgent treatment care, urgent treatment centre referral into pharmacy, again as part of an expansion to the community pharmacy consultation service, is CPCS, and there's other pilots kind of upcoming. So again, for us, referrals into pharmacy and also potentially referrals out of pharmacy is a key part of our digital strategy going forward. What's also really important for us is to help smooth the waters for community pharmacy and to make their to maximize efficiencies, that we are encouraging kind of referrals in the same way. What we don't want them to have to do is be logging into different systems or logging into different ways to receive a referral from a different sector. So it's really important for us that we are aligning with the work on bars, and looking forward to hearing more about it as this session goes on, Adnan. Any questions?
No, thank you, Libby, and thank you, Adrian. And Libby, there's some word clouds and questions coming up, which I'll bring you in when they come up.
No problem at all.
Cool. So I'm going to pass it over to Will. So we've got the policy, why we're doing it, based on sort of user needs and policy needs. So Will, do you want to give a quick canter through what we're doing as a program, what we're working on?
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, Adnan. Morning, everybody. It's lovely to see so many. Unfortunately, we haven't got the rest, but I'm sure we'll be able to send out the video afterwards and they'll get the recording. But thank you very much to those who have been able to get on. So yeah, I'll introduce myself. So I'm Will Jagger. I'm the lead delivery manager for the Booking and Referral Standard. I work in NHS Digital and I sort of lead the team to deliver on our sort of milestones and the outcomes that we've been asked to deliver. I'll spend about 5 to 10 minutes on the who, how, and what of the program, to be honest, just to sort of elaborate on Adrian's vision and Libby's sort of ambitions for what we're trying to deliver with bars. So if we could just go on to the next slide, please, Barry. I'll start by putting up a picture of the team. Now, I don't put this up to show everybody how wonderfully good looking we are, how beautiful we are, but this is really just to give people a flavour of the size of the team, the amount of resource that's going into delivering bars as a going concern, and also to sort of stress that we're working as a collaborative and cross-organisational team. So what this picture here represents is members of team from NHS Digital, NHS E&I, from the Transformation Directorate. So actually, there's a cross-organisational team structure that BARS is working towards, which sort of means that we're able to cut through a lot of the policy and the red tape in order to deliver BARS at a bit more speed. And you'll see some of these speakers later on today, or some of these people as they speak through later on today. So if I just jump onto the program narrative, this sort of elaborates again on what Adrian was saying, but it gives us our sort of reason for the team and what we're trying to deliver, the why, the how, and the what. So if I could just draw your attention to the why, what we're looking to do really is simplify. So what BARS is doing is simplifying the transfer of a patient and their clinical information to where, or through the services to where they're most needed. Okay, and we're able to do that through the development of a standard and API, and we'll elaborate a great deal more on that as we get into the technical content of this sort of webinar and Learnathon later on. You'll get a chance to read this when the slides come out at the end of this, but I'd ask you to just sort of focus in on the red box at the bottom. So we know why we're doing it, we know how we're doing it, but the what. And for the suppliers and providers that are particularly pertinent to those on the call today, what we're aiming to do with BARS is provide a national standard that removes the need to support multiple and varied standards. We know there's a lot of standards out there at the moment, and they're all sort of higgledy-piggledy, some of them a little bit outdated. And so the intention with BARS is to create one single standard that can be used across a number of different use cases to be able to move patients from one place to another and their clinical information in a logical and easy manner. That's really what we're trying to do. So I quite regularly go back to the team and stress to them our program narrative of the why, the how, and the what. So that leads me on to the sort of way we're doing this with our suppliers, and we've got suppliers on the call that will come up in a minute to talk about how their relationship is with us as how we've started to co-create. But we very much in BARS, and we've set the entire team up to work with suppliers as our partners. So actually throughout the development of everything we're doing around BARS, it's about working with suppliers as partners to get and to lever a number of the benefits that we can get from doing that. And there's a number of bullet points there that sort of talk us through why we would want to work with partners and what the benefits are. I won't labor these because I'm very conscious of time, and I think they're pretty straightforward. But what I would say is there's a couple of things that I would pull out. The first one is about reducing the risk. By working with partners, we're able to test the products, we can develop them together. We know that when we sort of go out to market, those have already been validated by the supplier community because we've tested with them. So we're not creating something and handing it to suppliers and asking them to build with it. We will create with you, with our supplier community and those that come forward to support us in the first of types, to build a standard that we know will work and we know will be tested. So actually when we push it out there for adoption, it's ready to go in all respects. That's what we're actually endeavoring to do with BARS. So while we're creating the standard, we're creating the activity behind it, we're also creating something that we know will work first time. So it'll be easier to take to market. If we can just move on to the next one. So where are we at the moment? So when we were asked to start working on this, and we're way back about a year ago or so, we were commissioned to start looking at create two use cases. And those were 111 to an emergency department. And then as time's gone along, we've picked up the 999 to the CAS service as well. So those are the two use cases that we've used as our vehicle to create the BARS standard. Where we are now is we've got a milestone of the 30th of June in order to get those completed in all respects. And by that, I mean, we're going to be able to have those standards available, or the standards available for those use cases to be rolled out for adoption across the country. So I think that's really important. But also behind the scenes, and the work we're also doing is the underpinning architecture. And that's the bit that we'll come on to later in the technical elements of this Learnathon. The underpinning architecture of how we're doing that, making sure that when we get these standards and we start rolling them out for adoption, there's all the activity that's been done behind the scenes to make sure it works. And by that I mean the sort of the clinical work, the assurance work, the path to live activity, all the onboarding activities in place, the technical architecture is in place, so everything will be ready to go, and the foundations for what we're coming on to next are all ready and tested, and we can start building on the BARS standard to other use cases. So if we could just move on to the next slide, Barry, that sort of brings me to my final slide, is talking about what we're doing next. So we've got our first of types, and we'll have those delivered by the summer this year, which then we're going to turn our attention very quickly through what we're calling our sort of delivery factory, which we'll talk about later on. But essentially our delivery factory will take us through the next use cases, and we're doing this through a sort of prioritized manner. So we're working with our EI colleagues to prioritize through policy and the requirements of the use cases as based on the need as defined by the users out there. So essentially, we've already got our next use cases lined up. So as soon as we finished in June with the first of types, we'll be moving swiftly on to IUC and 999, to those 6 you can see on the screen, 5 you can see on the screen there. But what I would stress, and at the very bottom bullet point, is we're talking there about many more as well. At the moment, we've got about 45 use cases, which we started to have a long list of prioritized, a prioritized long list, which we're working through and we'll refine over time. But let's be clear, those 45 will expand very quickly when we start rolling this standard out as the national standard to many other use cases, many other permutations of care settings that we could come across. And we'd come back to our supplier community, we'll come back to those on the call here with an interest in this of where we would like to see other use cases and potential for this standard to be rolled out. But that was my last slide. So I think there's one question, or first question now. So if we just move on to the next slide, please. And I'll probably hand back to you, Adnan, at this point, but happy to take any questions if there's any in the chat later on. But I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Will. So that was a good summary. As Will said, is we've created a standard, a generic standard that will support any 20 booking and referrals, but you've got to start somewhere. You've got to build that foundation. And for me, and I really push the team, and the team really support me, is that we've got to work with suppliers as partners. So we want to work together to create this standard so we can deploy it at pace everywhere. And as a supplier, it's important that you don't get different people asking you on different days to build a different booking standard or referral standard. We've got to try to make it easy for suppliers to work with us. And as Will said, we built the foundation. We've got a really good website being built, and we're going to have really good testing tools so suppliers can build at pace. So the question I've got here is that, okay, we've got a prioritized list, but what use cases are important to you out there? And I'm happy that we've got pharmacy in the middle there, Libby. That's a really important one, because that's one of the things we are tackling next. But I would say we'll leave this open. So throughout the session, please go around and keep adding to it, about what we're doing. And as we go more and more through it, we'll come back to this list, because this will help me with my prioritization session, saying, what should we do next? This is what people want. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and I've asked a few of the suppliers who are working with us, not everyone, because there are a lot of other suppliers working with us, to give us some honest feedback, because part of the thing I want to do is have retros and feedback from suppliers. If we're not working for the suppliers and partners, what can we do? What can we do more for them? So I regularly speak to all the suppliers out there, and they regularly chat to me and saying, what can I do better? I've said to them, give us some honest feedback. So I've got Carleen from Advanced, or One Advanced, I should say, to give us some feedback. So Carleen, if you're around, if you can go off mute and tell the audience about how everything's going.
Yeah, hi Adnan, hi everyone. So I'm Carleen Nichol, and I'm the product manager for urgent and unplanned care and identity and access management at Advanced. I think there's a slide. That's it. Advanced are the 4th largest mission critical UK enterprise software and services supplier, with around 20,000 customers and over 2,700 employees. So Advanced provides software into 5 different sectors, and we are developing BARS in our health and care sector using Adastra, which is our patient case management software used in the majority of 111 and out of hours providers in England. So we started working with the BARS team in September 2021 to support the 999 to 111 use case. The collaborative approach has encouraged a high level of engagement from NHS Digital, Hexagon and SCAS, who are supporting the first of type, knowing that we're all contributing to the future of interoperability for health and care systems across the country is a huge driver for all the parties. The joined up way of working has enabled us to input into the design and shape of the final specification. It's also given us the ability to challenge decisions and get instant feedback from all parties to ensure we're all comfortable with the final spec, and that the providers would be getting value if they were using the new standard. So during the first of type, communication to us is key. This is to ensure momentum and make sure that we're all working towards the same goals. And the communication between the teams has been great. It's been regular and it's been really useful. We've got Teams channels, regular meetings are happening, first of type forums where suppliers can share ideas and problems, and we get regular specification file updates. And the BARS team in general have always been very quick to respond, which allows our development to continue flowing without having too much disruption when we have a question or concern. So the biggest challenge of being a first of type is working on an evolving specification. In one way, it can be time consuming and can remove focus from our planned roadmap. But in another way, we really enjoy working like this, as we like to approach our roadmap in an agile way. So overall, Advanced want to give our customers the opportunity to feed into our development strategies. And although it can be very challenging at times, we thrive under the pressure and enjoy being a first of type supplier. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Colin. It's really good feedback, and I really appreciate the team from Advanced and all the work they're doing. And I know my team at BARS, they really like working with Advanced and other partners, I call them. So yeah, thank you so much. So we're going to pass on to Susan from IC20. From the Clio Systems. So Susan, if you're around, could you please give us an update about what Clio are doing and your approach to work and how you've worked with BARS, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Spriggs. I'm the head of systems development, actually for IC24, but working on the Clio systems solutions. Barry, did you want to go on to the next slide, please? So Clio Systems is a wholly owned subsidiary of IC24, and we've been working in collaboration with the BARS team for many years with several different booking HTML systems. So Clio Systems has a development team that works within IC24, and the benefit of this is that we actually have those end users and the people who are providing the services feeding back into our systems and how we can improve that patient journey through our quality improvement and quality champions programs. So we listen very carefully to where the users say that the patients get stuck in that process. And then we use our data to understand how we can improve that journey for them. And then we liaise with our BARS colleagues in how we can use the booking functions, etc., to speed up that process if we can. Did you want to go on to the next slide, Barry, please? Okay, so our journey with BARS as it's been over the years, it started with the GP Connect consumer, where we were alpha tester and then moved into the beta testing and the first of type. We then moved on, and I understand we are the only provider, service provider and system supplier who are using the provider and consumer services for our UTCs. And this again allows us to feed back into our colleagues at the BARS team so that we can improve that journey where we can and identify any touch points where there might be an issue. We did work closely with the BARS team and our NHS Digital colleagues to support the EDI during the pandemic, so implementing that solution and ironing out any issues very early doors with them. And we've also been working with the 9s and 1s teams to, again, for an alpha phase development, so that we can understand specifications and validation and referral from that service from 999 into 111 for C3s and C4s. Did you want to go on to the next slide, please, Barry? So I'll let you all just run through these. I believe they're going to be shared afterwards, but this is the feedback that we've kind of had from our development team on how they have found working with the BARS teams and how that's helped them with understanding the technologies that we use our side and how we can progress those. And happy to answer any questions at the end if needed. Thank you.
No, thank you, Susan, so much. This question's coming in Slido, so we'll get that into the next when we get the next section. But yeah, I think I really appreciate you know, the Clio team coming back and having that dialogue and saying why are we doing it this way, and for the team then to change it, you know, because I think it's that partner relationship that we want to learn, and also looking at, you know, some of the older standards, GP Connect and Care Connect, and what were the shortfalls in the standards, you know, right at the time, but shortfalls now. What can we do to improve it? And what I want to say is that the team are around for many years now at the moment, so the standard's going to be iterated for the next few years, because you know, we're focused on the use cases. As we get to more complicated use cases, we'll learn, we'll adapt, and we'll get better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you, Susan, for giving some feedback. So Barry, if you can move on. So we've got Michael from WASP to give us an update. So Michael, if you're on.
I am. I'm loud, proud, and in full effect, I think, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, WASP Software, we are an organisation, a small software house, which has been working with Care Connect for provider sites. So we work with the large acute trusts, and we provide a PAS EPR agnostic scheduling service. So to the outside world, we provide schedules to allow NHS 111 booking or CAS service booking, and we then present that back into the acute trusts where there are non-compliant Care Connect or BARS solutions. The main work we've been doing is with Meditech, and indeed that's our gold standard. So Meditech users don't actually see WASP at all. Everything from booking goes straight into Meditech, but we also have integration services with Cerner, Allscripts, well, Lorenzo, IPM, and Patient Center. And even at arm's length, we're able to provide, as the CCIO at Warrington has suggested, between 90 and 99% reduction in the administrative workload. We're delighted to be working with the BARS first of type, mainly because it's a huge improvement on Care Connect, and we've always got on well with Carl, Barry, and David in this activity. But the reality is, this is, as far as WASP is concerned, an unvarnished pitch to the main acute PAS and EPR suppliers to use WASP for this sort of functionality. Thank you, Barry. So perhaps I should have been a little bit more sensitive based on what's going on internationally at the moment in terms of my title. But as far as we see it, is that the urgent and emergency care scheduling is still an emerging market. So we're still getting multiple messages from potential clients that NHS England and Improvement has suggested they're looking for point-to-point interfaces, whereas NHS Digital is, as has already been described today, is looking at any-to-many. BARS is a first-of-type specification, and terms like minimum viable product and things indicate that we're still very much at the beginning of this market at the moment. And looking at how we will proceed and go forward from here, there is like to be a mixed economy of both Care Connect and BARS as we move forward, and indeed others potentially. There's also a clear change in policy with NHS Digital now very keen on ED streaming and redirection, and I'll come onto that in a minute. And I also believe there's going to be other priorities later on down the year in terms of when politicians recognise there's increasing wait times for outpatient appointments, and this is where we're looking at ERS. And then the other area where we struggle on the provider side a little bit is there's still a significant proportion of provider sites still using EDI, which is if you don't know, the NHS Digital's free to use service, which is supposed to be withdrawn from use or support end of March this year, but it's likely to be going on until 2023. Thank you, Barry. So very much the holy grail seems to be the streaming and redirection service, where statistics from sites with which we're working have identified that over 70% of unheralded patients attending ED could be treated elsewhere. Now, to some extent, this is very much a cultural and generational issue. I always remember when I got hurt, I used to get taken to A&E by my mum, and I think the message about NHS 111 first has not necessarily got out as far as it might have done, especially when we consider the number of patients still turning up to A&E who haven't rung NHS 111. And to some extent, this has got nothing to do with NHS 111 and stroke bars. It's all to do with how the patients is managed, how they're offered choice, how they're moved on when they do get to ED. And then when we're into that market, and I think this is the point that's being made all through this session, is that the nice thing about standards is there's so many to choose from. So we got in the UEC market, Care Connect bars and ITK. In streaming, we're looking at ITK and PDF, and both of those products are out of NHS Digital. When we move into primary care, we've got all sorts of different things. Pharmacy, it's interesting what was said earlier on today about the messaging standards being used for that. And the other ones we've just identified there as dental ophthalmology. These are all areas where we should be redirecting patients to away from ED. Thank you, Barry. So what WASP does is we offer the agility. The big system suppliers tend to have long product roadmaps. They have other priorities. As I've suggested, this is still an emerging market. It's very agile. You need to be agile. And sometimes it's a bit like trying to hit a moving target. I think Carleen mentioned that a little bit herself. But equally, the time is now. Time is moving on. Requirements are now. Acute trusts have requirement now. So the point we're looking to make here is that WASP has done much of a heavy lifting, and we can offer bars compliance, Care Connect compliance, and these sort of facilities to the big PAS EPR suppliers, in some extent, to save you having to do it yourselves. Thank you. Thank you, Barry.
So thank you, Michael. And yeah, it's quite interesting when we, I think sometimes we mention system to system integration, but we just means that, from a sender, can you send it to a receiving site, and at the receiving site, can we remove that duplication of effort? So even though it was a product or program lead for EDI, we knew that was a minimal viable product. We knew that, it was two systems you're logging into. So we want to remove that to give users of their receiving site access to their core system, and they can just use it and they don't have to log in 2 or 3 systems. So thank you, Michael. So Barry, if you move on to the next slide. So we're going to go through the technology of bars. So I'm going to bring in the really clever people in the team to explain how it works. So Dave, if you're on, could you take over, please?
Yes, of course. Hopefully you can hear me. I hope.
You can hear. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. I'm going to turn my camera off in a minute. I thought I'd turn it on to say hello. My computer tends to overheat dramatically with the camera on. And the other thing, I've noticed that we have broken the 100 participant barrier. So hopefully maybe Helen's managed to fettle some stuff in the background. So
yeah, she has. We've
so welcome.
And we've emailed everyone else as well to say come and join.
Cool. Excellent. So yeah, welcome newcomers. And just to reiterate, we are recording, so if you want to see the earlier parts, if you miss them, you can see them. I am going to stop my video before my computer goes mental. So yeah, this sort of next section, myself and some of our team members are going to talk about the technology of bars, how we got to where we got to, how it works, how we are trying to achieve and deliver what we're setting out to do, deliver on our ambitions. And actually, if I don't know everyone, I should introduce myself. So I'm Dave Roddy. I head up the product side of things at Bars. So I'm responsible for making sure the standard gets delivered and making sure that it meets our aims and ambitions, along with my excellent and amazing colleagues. We have a fantastic team here at Bars. And there's some really, really clever people working on this stuff. Barry, do you want to move on to this next section? So I'm going to start off talking about kind of what is Bars, like actually what is it? And then we're going to start to get into some of the detail of how it works. So Dylan is going to talk a little bit about how we are productizing this standard, which actually quite an interesting challenge. And then we're going to get into a bit more of the sort of technical detail. Not too technical, but I think just technical enough so you can at least come away with an understanding of what we're trying to do and fundamentally how it works. So if we move on, I wanted to start to talk a little bit about our journey to get here, how we got here. So as a team, we actually come from quite a varied background, and we've all worked on many different existing or predecessor or even legacy standards that have sort of gone before Bars in the booking referral space specifically, but also in other areas as well. And we have worked in across various different care settings and things. And so we've got, I think, a very good understanding of a lot of the challenges and limitations of attempts at standards in the past. So we've got things like 1.1 CDA over ITK as an example. So we've got very extensive experience of that particular standard. Also got Care Connect Booking, which is actually the direct predecessor to Bars. So the Care Connect Booking program was an attempt to have a booking standard, and was kind of the foundation of some of our ideas around Bars, and helped us to evolve some of the concepts. So although they weren't necessarily applied into that standard, by doing it, allowed us to learn how a much more ambitious sort of universal standard might actually work, how it could work. You've also got things like GP Connect and the ERS program. So we've got experience of a lot of experience of working with GP Connect, with GP Connect team deploying GP Connect into primary care. We've also got team members that have worked with the ERS program going back years. So we've got kind of a real broad set of experience that's helped us to really form our ideas about what we wanted to do here with Bars. So as has been described already, Bars came about, I think initially really as a focus star, sort of came out of the 1.1 first program, and there was a sort of an initial ask to solve a specific need. And we thought about this, and we sort of basically decided that we wanted to, rather than solve a specific problem in one place, that actually for booking and referral flows, and really actually we should just say referral flows, because booking There's a lot of focus. Most people talk about booking. There's a lot of focus on booking, but really what they mean is referral, not booking. Booking is actually merely just a minor administrative function to support an end-to-end flow where you're moving a patient from one service to another. There are a couple of exceptions where booking stands alone, but very, very few. So generally, it's just part of a referral flow. So really what we wanted to do was to standardize referral. And, thinking about it, it's ultimately all referral flows across the NHS boil down to pretty much the same fundamental steps, same fundamental processes. So this was our starting hypothesis, right? So if we could boil it down to fundamental processes and it's pretty much the same everywhere, can we not define a standard that supports those processes and enables these workflows, these operational flows, these patients to be moved between services? And one of the things that really kind of cements our view on the world, our view of what bars should be, is we have developed a real passion and focus for digitizing operational workflow and business process. I think a lot of interoperability is healthcare interoperability. There's a huge focus placed on data interchange, right? Interoperability of data. And BARS is not in any way focused on that at all. So it's not, we're not interested in interoperability of data. It's necessary under the hood to achieve a booking and referral flow, but fundamentally BARS is standardizing operational workflows, providing a technical way of supporting that workflow, that process. So we're very much focused around workflow end to end. Data interoperability data will not deliver you a digital referral. It just won't, because there's so much more to it. So that's why we're passionately focused around end-to-end flow. What's it actually mean for the patient? What's it actually mean for the users using these systems that our partners have spoken about already, our supplier partners? So that's something that's really important and really is one of the key elements of driving our thinking and our approach to BARS. And really also, we developed this strong belief that fundamental workflow problems should be solved once across all care settings. So we believe there's actually a number of these similar types of things across the NHS that can be universally standardized. And it basically makes life better for everyone, for suppliers, for providers, for commissioners, for, most importantly, patients. And that it really is something that we should be trying to do. It's very ambitious, but we do believe because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We should try and do the hard things. And a very good friend of mine and colleague, Kate Gill, she's always banging on about being good citizens. And that is something that which we want to do. We want to do what's right, not what's easy or what's possible. We want to do what's right. So this is an attempt. This program is an attempt to try and do this, try and see if it is possible to achieve this with a universal standard that works everywhere. So do you want to move on to the next slide? So what is BARS? Booking and Referral Standard. Now, I'm as my colleagues will tell you, I am quite pedantic. I am by nature a pedantic person, and I'm very particular about terms and terminology. Standard is an interesting term. It's one of these very heavily overloaded terms that carries a lot of baggage. A bit like referral, actually. We talk about referral with a little r. Actually, there's many different definitions of referral, and we have a very loose term definition of that term. We talk about booking and referral like flows. That's the phrase I like to use. It covers a whole gamut of things, not just a formal legal transfer of care and that sort of thing. There's a whole other, it's all workflows where a patient's information has been passed on for onward care in some form. And likewise, standard is similar. It's very, virtually everyone you speak to has a different opinion on what standard means. So I wanted to define what we mean by standard. Now, I've sort of developed this model of a kind of hierarchy of standards. And so this is kind of how I view the standards world. That within healthcare, there's this hierarchy. And kind of at the top level, driving most things is policy. It's kind of the starting point. And you know, we had Adrian and Libby talking earlier. So initially, you'll define policy, which in itself is effectively, you know, defining a sort of standardized, a very high level standard ambition to deliver some kind of service. And so that policy, that's sort of standardizing at that level, then goes down a step to commissioning standards. So the way policy gets made real is it gets commissioned. So in order to commission something, you need to develop a definition of you know, procuring or getting something to happen. So you need to define what that is, the thing that you want to happen. So again, commissioning, there tends to be these commissioning standards that are used to make services real. And then below that, you'd have service specifications, service standards that are really the nitty-gritty, primarily operationally focused. And somewhere at that level, both actually in commissioning and at the service sort of standard level, they would be defining technology, because actually they would say, this is where something like bars would come in, is ideally they'd actually be a service being commissioned that says, to deliver this service, you need a piece of software, procure your software that is compliant with the bar standard, so it can do booking and referral in this standardized way. And so there's a number of different things that sit at this level, and there's things like, there are some technology standards. So we talk about bars being an interoperability standard. I tend to slot it in at that level. It's like a super standard. It's an umbrella standard. So beneath bars, and there are more branches to this. So we're sort of going down a tech branch here, but there's probably other branches I think that would come off from these. But an umbrella standard, bars being an umbrella standard. What do I mean by that? Well, beneath bars, in order to the underlying technology, what we've done is we want to leverage existing best of breed global international standards for the different things that we're trying to do. So an example of the lower level sort of tech standards are where you would find things like API standards, standards for APIs, information model standards. So information standards that define how we capture and describe healthcare events, how we record healthcare information. And then you've got things like data interoperability standards, such as FHIR, which describes how to encode the healthcare information and transport it between systems. So BARS leverages all these things, brings it all together, pieces it together into a workable solution so that it allows you to successfully achieve a referral or a booking end to end. So it's not just about defining specific technology specifications, it's also about how that weaves into an operational service. So we need to understand how those services work, and we need to understand how the technology can support that end-to-end process. So included in BARS is not just tech, but also guidance and documentation about how the technology should be used and how it should be integrated. Things like, how, even as far as potentially how certain pieces of information should be displayed, rules and guidance around that. There's a whole range of things that comes under this umbrella that we can put it all together, and it allows us to have this standardized way of achieving these booking and referral flows technologically. So if you move on a slide, Basil, please. Thank you very much. So when we started out, one of the things we did was we wanted to just establish some key principles. We wanted to create a foundation that a guiding light that will sort of steer all our decisions. And we felt like if we can adhere to these principles, we're going to hopefully be able to achieve what we want to achieve with bars. And it comes out of a lot of our prior experience and understanding a lot of the different types of flows. And so as much as possible, we want to be able to maintain these principles in everything we're doing. So one of the key things we want to do is low barrier to entry and maximum adoptability. So by that I mean, there's no point producing a standard that's a way of doing something that's so complex and so hard to do that no one's going to do it. No one's going to want to do it. No suppliers are going to want to build it. We've always had a very good working relationship with suppliers in the past, and we've really enjoyed that. Quite a number of us have worked in the commercial software sector. We've sat on both sides, and I think it's essential for any standard to be as easy as possible to adopt. So we want very low barrier to entry, maximum adaptability. It needs to be easy to implement solutions. It needs to be easy to deploy, easy to configure, easy to use. So everything we do wants to be driven by that principle. So all the decisions about the tech we use, how it works, etc. An example, actually, we had one of the questions. I think we've got some really good questions lined up, and we should probably take a minute to look at those soon. I know one of them was like, is this only on HSCM or no? That's one of the, an example of a technology decision. It's all internet facing, because you recognise actually. I always like to talk about bars. One of the things I like to say, as a challenge, I'd like it to be used to book tennis courts. Right? Sounds ridiculous. It's a healthcare standard, but actually with social prescribing, it potentially is a real thing. Like, if you imagine your GP prescribing things for certain patients, might actually prescribe exercise classes for mental health patients or something. It's good, it's good for their mental health, or that all that sort of stuff. Potentially, it could be used for that. So, I always like to challenge, and you get into things like maybe the dental world and the pharmacy world, where there's users sat in a pharmacy or a dental practice on their system. They don't have connection to N3 or HSCN. They're not hooked up to these private networks. They're just, it's got an internet connection. We want them to be able to, we want bars to work for them, as well as for your big hospital system that's built on its, complex infrastructure that's all kind of private and locked down and so on. It's, we want it to be as accessible as possible. Any-to-any connectivity. So that's another thing. It's bandied around a lot, this kind of phrase. And what we mean by that really is the ability for services to be able to attempt bookings and referrals with anyone. So if you're compliant with bars, you should be able to attempt at least a booking and referral with someone else. And there shouldn't be any kind of technical barrier stopping you from doing it. The only barrier should be that it's an inappropriate thing you're trying to do and you're not allowed to do it. It should be because technically it's not possible. So part of that, we want to make sure that everything is live and on the fly. So we want to minimize caching of data. We want to minimize stale data being passed around, duplication of information being passed around. So we want to make sure it's all on the fly. And we want to make sure also things like the connections, the operations, the authentication, access control, that all of this can be established at the point that the user clicks a button. That's the dream. That's what we want to do. We want to make sure that when they click a button, a system could go and attempt a booking or referral with another system that's never attempted that before, knows nothing about that other end. We want to be able to enable that so that it doesn't have to be pre-configuration, doesn't have to be point-to-point configuration, doesn't have to be network connections set up routes between those two systems. We want it all to be done on the fly at the point in time you're attempting to do the thing you're trying to do. Also, we have this term universality, and again, that's the thing that underpins what we're trying to do with bars. So we want everything to be based on a universal way of working that can apply to all care settings. So we're always challenging ourselves with all our decisions. Is it going to work here? Is it going to work there? We don't want to do is to go down a little cul-de-sac where it works over here, but it will never work over there. So we're always trying to check ourselves and make sure that we're making the right decisions, being these good citizens. So we want to make sure everything's viewed from a holistic non-care settings perspective. We want to put down any preconceptions and prejudices we've got. Everyone kind of carries around their own backlog of experience behind them that helps them form their opinions on the world and opinions on how things should be done. You know, and we want to try and recognise that the way I think something should be done isn't necessarily going to work for everyone, and maybe isn't the right way to work. It's just that that's my experience has led me to have that opinion. So we're always trying to think holistically and make sure that our decisions aren't coloured by these you know, preconceptions that we might have. We're always trying to have an open mind. We're very open to change and open to discussion. We're very transparent, trying to share everything we're doing, and open to input. We don't think that we're the cleverest people in the world and we know everything. We don't. We're not the cleverest people in the world. We don't know everything. You know, we want to make sure that we can talk to as many people as we can and get as much input as we can to make sure that we're moulding this standard over time to work for everyone. And there's another principle in here. It's a little bit specific, this one, but you'll see later how it underpins fundamentally how we're able to achieve this universality. And traditionally, the initiator of a referral, the initiator of a transfer of information, typically, historically, the kind of paradigm that's been used has been basically the sender will give you everything they know, and the receiver has to then sift through it and try and figure out what it means to them. So that doesn't really work when you start to think about how we can actually achieve, and we'll come on to some of these underlying concepts about how you can achieve this universality. There's a very key concept that comes from this. But actually, what should happen is the receiver of the information, the one who's going to accept this transfer of information and take on the care of the patient, they should say, this is what I need to know. I need to know this information to do my job, and I want nothing more and nothing less. And the sender is then incumbent on them to get the information that's been asked for, put it together and hand it over. And actually, you know, one of the challenges for this I often get is being, well, what if the sender doesn't have the right information? Well, my response is always that they probably shouldn't be doing that referral then, should they? Because if that's a commissioned flow, then they should have been commissioned to collect the right information in the first place, to give the receiver the information they need to be able to do their job. So this is an example of how we've got these hypotheses, these ideas that we want to test. So that's why, part of the first type would be to test some of these ideas. Is that right? Is that right? The right principle? Is that we're going down the right route there with that principle? We believe we are, and we think it's necessary in order to achieve this universality. So Barry, do you want to move on to the next slide, please? Right, thinking about bars as a product. Now, I'm just going to speak for a moment, and then I'm going to hand over to my good friend and colleague Dylan, if he's still up to it, because I know he's actually feeling a bit poorly today. So just to sort of transition to this idea of thinking about bars as a product. One thing I wanted to say about bars is, yes, we're developing this standard about bookings and referrals, but there's another thing we're trying to do here, and we're trying to break some new ground also about how we go about doing standards. So we've also put an awful lot of effort and thinking into ways of working and how standards can be packaged up, presented to the world and consumed. And so there's a lot of, I think, some really great innovation that we've done that has really kind of helped us to deliver our aims with bars around the way we work, the way we organise ourselves as a team, and the way we organise our outputs and our products. And part of that is this some really key concepts, and it's really important to understand these when we move on to talking a bit more about the detail. So Adnan's telling me to shut up, which is not uncommon because I do normally go on a bit. I'm gonna hand over to Dylan, who's one of our lead product owners, to talk about how we view bars as a product.
Thanks, Dave. So I hope you can hear me okay. Not if you can, Adnan, or anyone.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. So yeah, good morning, everyone. So I'm Dylan Hainsworth. I work in the product side for bars, also working a little bit on the BA side. I'm going to go over a little bit about our thinking around bars and what we're sort of anticipating for phase 2 and thinking about, you know, bars as a product and how we support development and aid the adoption of bars moving forward, really. Okay, Barry, next slide, please. Before I continue, we've got a Q&A session just after my piece. I've only got a couple of slides, so we'll go through some of the questions and answers at that point. So just make sure you keep them coming into Slido and we'll pick them up. Right, okay, so thinking about bars as a product. So we have 3 separate products that we've come up with. So bars core, we've got the bars applications, and we've got the bars payload definition library, or the PDL as we're calling it. But for bars core, you know, we're always talking about how we can reuse as much as possible from the work that we've been doing in phase 1. And this means, you know, reusing as many components as we possibly can. We're always talking about, you know, not building anything too niche that is not reusable. So that, you know, that's one of our core principles. Is some of these components that we're building in the background are, you know, the core functionality around bars, the central infrastructure, the Apogee systems, the data stores, the core standard, our documentation, the websites, you know, the transport layer, messaging and payload patterns, the use of our standard, the authentication security and things like that. We're really hoping to keep nailed down in our bars core. So that's going to be largely unchanged throughout each of our applications which are coming up in future. So looking at bars applications, this is where, you know, the use of bars and how we're using it for each of the care settings. So when thinking about bars in the applications, you know, it's a new way of looking at use cases, is putting together the collateral that specifically looks at these use cases. So for the bars applications, you know, you will be using an element of all the core functionality, but specifically for your setting to setting use case, there'll be some specific guidance around how you would use the specification to achieve that particular flow. There'll also be some documentation around that particular flow. And you can imagine there'll be a lot of collateral that's coming from bars in terms of the clinical safety and assurance updates as well for each one of those use cases. But fundamentally, once you've built to deliver one of the applications of bars, you'll be using all of the core functionality. And our hope is, like we said, to reuse as much as possible. So once you've built the first use case, you know, to adopt and add additional flows onto that, you don't need to build against the core functionality again. That will remain static for a period of time. And all it will be is using, you know, the new use case specific information and guidance of how to then achieve your next flow. So that is one of the things we're trying to achieve. With the bars payload definition library, this is, you know, thinking about the artifacts we're creating, a specific set of artifacts that is in a library that's going to be reused. And these are things like the FHIR artifacts, our message definitions, the conformance profiles and packages that we're building. Like we said, we're aiming to reuse a lot of these things going forward. So Barry, next slide, please. So with that in mind, those 3 products, you know, we're thinking about how do we manage our releases. So bars core, like I said, is going to be the core foundation of bars. This is something that's going to be, you know, not something that's going to change regularly. We see this on possibly a regular release cycle, maybe once or twice a year. This enables us to keep the core as stable as possible. We're only going to be making changes to core where it's required to support new use cases. Obviously, all the work we're doing, we're trying to you know, maintain the backward compatibility as much as possible, so that any new changes to core support the existing applications that are out there and existing flows that are out there. Looking at the bars applications, I'll touch on our product production line process that we've formulated for the team. but this will be a more continuous release pattern for the applications, and we'll be releasing these throughout the year as we generate and collect new use cases for new care settings. We may also run multiple releases for applications in parallel throughout the year. You can imagine us working on multiple setting-to-setting referrals, bookings throughout the year. We're also, release management is going to be a key part of all of this. So you can imagine us delivering the first iteration for 1.1 to ED, in a year's time, 6 months, and new changes come out, some new functionalities required to support that setting. And what we'll do is obviously iterate on that original 1.1 to ED flow, possibly an increment on our payload definitions, or possibly an increment on core. And then we'll be releasing a new version for that particular flow. Like I said, as much as possible, we'd like to support backward compatibility. And within the payload definitions, this is also going to be like the BARS applications where required individual continuous releases. And like I said, the payload definitions are really going to be reusable across multiple settings and across multiple applications. So we don't see those changing very often. And again, like we said, if you've built to the current referral standard, you've heard from our suppliers that we've got some building from 9s to CAS, we've got some building from 1.1 to ED. Largely, the message definition is identical. The only difference is how you interpret the information, both from the sender and receiver side. So we're really trying to keep it very generic and allow us to use this information across multiple care settings and even wider, like Dave said, possibly outside of health care. And that's quite possible with the way that we're developing the standard. Some of the artifacts that we're obviously going to be releasing part of BARS to support adoption and to support business cases and further rollout of this is going to be updates to our website. So please look out for that. I think Adnan posted a link into our website previously. We've got the implementation guidance, which is going to come with each one of our applications. We should, make it easily and accessible for anybody trying to work out what we're delivering. So please feedback on our website. We're in constant development at the moment, so we'd like to hear back from you. We're going to be constantly updating our API specification where required. Any payload definition library artifacts that we're going to be releasing. We're talking about assurance. We're going to have assurance for each one of these settings. Like I said before, once you've gone through the majority of the assurance process for core, we're hoping that the next use case you pick up, you've already demonstrated your core functionality capabilities, and therefore it'll be a smaller assurance process getting onto the sort of newer use cases, so building up your portfolio of offering really. We're obviously also heavily involved with clinical safety and clinical safety documentation, and we've got Julie will be coming on to that in a few slides time. We've also got other artifacts as well that we'll be releasing. So we're doing a lot of path to live and IG as well. And that's the kind of stuff that we'll be focusing on as part of the product side of BARS. And like I said previously, we've actually developed what we were calling the production line or the factory approach to delivering the new applications of BARS, which we hope will help to be able to expand the use of BARS and following the standard process help us to deliver new applications of BARS in a much more efficient way. So two examples really. So we've got a new use case potentially coming in. It requires no core changes, so all the core functionality is exactly the same. It fits with an existing payload definition which we've got. So think about 1.1 to ED. The information that's flowing from one set to one end to the next is identical. The same kind of information is going. The only thing that we require to change is actually how you populate that information and what you do with that information on receipt. So that's really just around guidance. So that's the best case scenario. We're making no technical changes. If you've implemented the standard once before, the only thing you need to consider is how you now use the information for this particular workflow. That's the best case scenario for us in a new use case. Versus the complete opposite. So a new use case which requires core functionality changes where we've got central infrastructure changes because we need to now support new bits of data or a new way of collecting data. We need to develop a new payload potentially, or we need to make some major changes to anything in our payload definition library, and also then requires additional guidance, and you can imagine with that additional guidance comes assurance, and if you're changing core, you'd be significant amount of time required to then achieve that delivery date. So that's best case scenario versus worst case scenario. And like I said, because we're really focused in on being reusable as much as possible, we're hoping that, you know, best case scenario is going to be the majority of the time, and really making changes to core is going to be something which we won't be doing that often. So that's the direction we're going in with the products, really. And so yeah, we'd like to get some feedback from you guys. It's certainly the ones that are involved with using bars at the moment, so certainly go to Versa Type and have a look at our website and let us know what you're thinking about the development so far. I think that was it from me, Barry. I think we're on to the Q&A section now.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan.
Thanks very much.
So we've got a couple of questions, and we'll ask various people, but I've been answering some of them. So you can have a look at slide and you probably see some. So it's got a question is, when will the use case for GP booking being scheduled from anonymous? So I'll answer this. So obviously we've got the GP Connect standard, which is supporting booking from 111. What we're doing as an organization in NHS Digital is we're looking at how do we standardize standards. So do we have one single standard? And we've met with GP Connect, you know, the people in screening, vaccines, ERS, various people, and we've all agreed that we should have a single booking referral standard, which is great. We are working with our colleagues in E to say, can we get this endorsed? At the same time, we've got a pitch through GP IT Future saying, do we support referrals into GP via bars? And at the same time, we probably should look at PEM, and we should probably look at booking, which makes it a stronger case for change. Because what we don't want to do is just do a knee-jerk reaction, say let's change it for the sake of it. We've got to do it in a sensible way. So it's on our backlog. I haven't got dates yet, but I want to incorporate, you know, mainly replacing ITK with the bars referral, and also gives opportunity for other GP suppliers in the market and wider to work on the newer standards and not the old or any adapters or workarounds, really. So it's not a great answer, but it's on our backlog. I haven't got a date yet, but maybe in a few months' time, I can give you a better update. So I'm going to mark that as done. Looking at the questions, if I promote this one, I think this might be answered, but Dave, could you answer, will HSCN connection be required?
No. It's internet facing. Everything's internet facing. There's a policy at NHS Digital for all new stuff to be internet first, so yeah, bars does not require an HSCN connection at all for any of it.
Yep,
and that's part of the low barrier to entry that we've one of our principles.
So I'm hoping Claire's on the call. So we've got what user engagement has taken the place around these proposals. So remember, there's two parts. One, we're working with policy colleagues to make sure what's in current policy, what's in emergent policy, because that's going to have a focus on user engagement and user needs. But Claire, could you explain what we're doing with some of the new use cases about what we're doing with the users?
Yeah, in terms of our end users, in terms of pharmacy users.
Yeah. In terms of pharmacy, yeah. And,
well,
and it might be for Claire Fowle, sorry, and there's too many Claires.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I thought you meant me, and I was like, I don't think that's what I've been doing. Yeah.
But Claire, if you're on the call, otherwise I can answer.
Yeah, hi. So so the new use cases we've been looking at are community pharmacy, urgent dental, and urgent community response. A lot of our initial work was around sort of the background reading, that sort of desk-based research to understand the policy drivers around it, any previous research that's been undertaken already. So there was a big piece of work for PODAC, a programme of work where a lot of engagement was undertaken around those services to understand what the needs were. So that's sort of fed into the work we're doing. We are in the initial stages of engaging with users. So we're speaking to, for instance, DOS leads about urgent community response. We're putting together our engagement plan to engage with community pharmacy and urgent dental services. So we have done previous engagement for the 112 ED use case. So we're speaking to a lot of 111 and CAS providers. So we're looking forward to getting more engagement. So if there's any, if you have any suitable contacts around urgent community response services, urgent dental services, or community pharmacists, by all means get in touch, because that'll be really helpful.
So thanks, Claire. So yeah, so I think we are building the technical standard, but we're not doing it in isolation. We're working with suppliers, we're working with the policy team, and then as we get our use cases, we're going to work out with users of the system about what their needs are to make sure that feeds in. And part of the factory line that Dylan was explaining is we have got this feedback loop. So as soon as we get this feedback, it incorporates either into the current standard or into a new version of that standard. So next one was I've had, it says patient choice is fundamental for community pharmacy. So any referral is important. And I've just said, yes, I agree, Gemma, it is important. And that's why we want to, we want to make this standard so you can book from one place to any other place. So supporting that any to any vision, and me as a patient, for my dad, my daughter, myself, yeah, we want that patient choice. It's important. So a couple of more questions. So will ERS be replaced by bars? Dave, I don't know if you can answer that.
Yeah. So will ERS be replaced by bars? Yeah, it's sort of tricky to answer in the sense that it's kind of yes and no and yes again. So ERS and bars are actually two very different things. Bars is fundamentally a standard, and ERS is a service that does have some standardized ways of talking to it. So in the short to medium term, ERS will probably transition to being integrated with bars, so that the way you talk to the ERS service will be through bars, using this standardized way of working. Ultimately, ERS, the service will probably a lot of the stuff that's in there now is probably not necessary if you had a full kind of bars like ecosystem, and it will probably end up just being pared back to what it needs to be. So it's kind of there's a conjunction of bars and ERS.
And Dave, sorry, I'll put you on the spot. So, and I would say that ERS is led by Liz Butcher. She's an amazing individual, and we work quite a lot together. So ERS and bars, we're under the same sort of mega program. And I would say if someone's not on mute, if they can go on mute. And thank you. Yes, so Dave, I don't know if that's you. So we're part of the big piece of program together. So ERS and bars working quite closely together. We are looking at how we can join, even have some common APIs together. So it's not replacing directly, but working together to support the ecosystem.
Yeah, it's apples and oranges, and it's we're already working together on one specific capability already.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to do two more questions, easy ones. So we've got one. Could we get NHS pathway streaming and redirection product included in the referral work to support referring out of EDs? Yes, we can. So we just got to add this to the backlog. So yeah, that's definitely, we want to support you to ensure that you can refer out. Okay, and David's got a question, so we're going to do that and then maybe move on to the next one. We'll come back to more questions in a bit. So it's got your focus on making it easy for suppliers is terrific. So great job, guys. Is it going to be easy for suppliers to adopt and deploy at scale? Currently had bad experience with NHSD previously. I don't know, Carl, could you help with, based on what we're doing with how to make it easier?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the infrastructure does make it easier, as probably David's referring to. But equally, we're going to develop proper kind of deployment toolkit that will kind of cover all these different elements. We're going through it now. We're kind of building that up. So I mean, that's going to be what will allow you to kind of adopt it at scale, and it will cover the whole deployment process. It will be setting up what suppliers need to do, what providers need to do, end-to-end test package. So it'll be all things like that that allow you to kind of have a smooth transition between your development of it and your deployment of it to production environments. And obviously we also have all the path live environments that will kind of feed into that as well. So the deployment toolkit should work exactly the same on each of the environments, so you know what's coming, you know what you've got to do, and you can plan your projects appropriately.
David, I'm hoping that answered your questions. Yeah, but we have got that heart, building the standards that's easy for suppliers. And what we want is we want that standard to be adopted and used. So we've always thinking about how can we make it easier, not just for us, for everyone, really. So we've got quite a few questions. I'm going to come back to them because we've got another section in a bit, and I'm replying to questions coming up. So Barry, could you move to the next slide, please? And suitably on to Carl to explain workflow, which might help. So Carl, over to you, please.
Morning, everyone. I'm Carl Diaz, Technical Business Analyst for BARS. Yeah, I'm going to go into workflow, so hopefully trying to bring what's been said about the principles and product sets together in a kind of tangible form, really. So we'll move on to the next slide, Barry. So principally, we're looking at reusability and flexibility in the workflows. I mean, that feeds into the BARS core product, as we mentioned, and it's to be able to support like multiple use cases in the future, and also for the reusability for people building to the solution. As Dylan already said, we don't want to have to change core continually to be able to support new use cases. We want that to be the foundation. So it's that reusability and flexibility that's been incorporated into the core architecture that underpins the possibilities that BARS can support. And that's all part of the standard. And then in addition to that, we also then have the BARS infrastructure, which is what David alluded to his question there about. That does support and help suppliers on board more quickly. It is centralized, but the intention is that the standard is written in such a way that it would work point to point without that middleware in the center, basically. So that's kind of a core to take away here. But this, if we go through into like the workflow, it will show you how some of this kind of comes to life and how it feeds into some of the kind of the first use cases, the BARS applications that we're taking on. So it's 111 telephony and online into ED, and then also 999 into CAS as well for referral and for validation. So they're the use cases that we're adopting as first type, as people have already said. As we take on new use cases, though, what we do is we try and understand their workflow end to end and map those across what we've got in terms of the architecture, and see how they best fit. And as has already been alluded to, we are finding that it does fit multiple use cases just as on the back of the use case we've already done. So it's already kind of proving benefit and proving its worth. So that's a really positive sign for what we've developed so far, and what's going to be proved out in the first to type by the end of June, as already stated. In terms of the BARS infrastructure, though, so the bit in the middle that is part of BARS, but is separate to kind of the standard itself. It's actually a tangible thing. That is what supports like the speeds up the integrations. It then also allows for richer functionality, and it supports those flexibility and workflows as well. So that's things that it's doing kind of out of the box, basically. And as new use cases come on board, and also stuff that we've already found out, really, we've found quite a lot of things out in terms of what we see is coming in the future. So there's things that have already been referred to in the discussion that Adrian and people have already mentioned. It's things like tracking patients' journeys through services, etc. So these are new areas of functionality that we know are coming on. Negotiated referrals, for example, as well. So these are more complex and rich things that will become part of the core as we move on. If we can move on to the next step, I'm just going to go into some of the detail of what we've got at the moment, and some of the kind of how these principles kind of play out for us, really. So this diagram is available on our published website, on our published standard. So it's a swim lane diagram, as you can see, and it's covering some of these first use cases, and it's intended to be a generic diagram for these first use cases. And what it's showing you here is the top, we have what we determine as the sender. So that's the sender role, the person making the referral or the booking. In the yellow lane there, we have service discovery. So service discovery at the moment for our current use cases is UEC DOS, but it is intended that could be any type of service discovery. It could be a different directory of service. It could be local configuration. It's been developed in such a way that it can support almost any variation of that, from kind of local configuration right up to kind of national directory of services. We then have the NHS platform. So this is what the next layer sits on. It's the kind of core, the centralized platform that NHS offer, and on that we have the BARS API. So that's the bit that we're kind of speccing out and developing and basically building up and making available to people. But it does all sit on the current platform. And then the final layer in the green, we have what we term the receiver. So there are some key principles. There's a lot on screen, I know, but there's some key principles here. And this feeds into the principles that Dave's really alluded to in terms of BARS. So one of the first points here is checking this thing called check message definitions. So this is the point where the principle of the receiver dictating what they need in the referral. So the sender has to go to the receiver to understand what needs to be packaged up in the referral data or in the booking data, to be able to make that referral or booking. And that feeds into the payload definition library that's already mentioned as well. And we will come on to that in a bit more detail. And then you've got some of the core structures around the booking. So that's been taken reasonably wholesale from the current NHS booking standard. There's some differences, but principally the workflow is the same. And then finally, we have the referral itself, so making the referral between the sender and receiver. So the workflow is in the grey. You see the assessments. So that there's an assessment happening there, some sort of assessment to determine what level of acuity the patient is and what the particular need is. And then there's the service discovery step there as well in the grey. So that's looking at the DOS, as you can see. And then we move on to the integrations with the centralized platform and the BARS API. So you're authenticating with the platform, and then that enables you to then perform subsequent functions in workflow through into the BARS API. So as I said, this onboarding to platforms and BARS API will all be documented in the toolkit, but this is the deployment toolkit that is. But this is how it's working. And that BARS API is doing quite a bit of work in the background there. So the only thing you need when establishing the service is the service ID. And you then, as a sender, you basically push that to the BARS API, and it does all the working out where the endpoint is for you, and it then will make the request and you will provide with the response, basically. So there's the standard check capabilities. Then there's a section there around whether it supports BARS or not. So that will be a decision in the workflow about whether BARS is supported, and you'll determine that from the capabilities check, and you'll have the response from the BARS API to indicate that or not. And then, as I said, that next step is a really fundamental step in the workflow. It's one of the principles, and it's checking the message definitions, and this feeds into those payload definitions. And then subsequently, you've got the booking and the referral, so the checking of slots, displaying of slots, defining a slot to book, making the booking, and then also making the referral. The order of workflow is not determined like that. You could make that in any particular order. Obviously, it just depends on the use case and the BARS application, as we've said. Okay, if you move on to the next slide, Barry. So that was all in terms of request. And then we also support response. So this is an asynchronous response. So the request has already happened, and either side has hung up essentially, and then this is the asynchronous response back to that request. And this is where some of the kind of the richness and complexity of what BARS can support starts to come alive. Because at this point you can actually feed back on what's happened prior, and basically join up the whole kind of workflow essentially. So in our 112 ED use case, this feedback is in terms of safeguarding. So if a safeguarding concern is transmitted across in the referral, which is part of the first type requirements from 112 ED, if the patient does not attend or ends up as it was not brought at the receiver side, they then have the option and ability to feed that detail back to the original sender, indicating that was a failed visit, a failed referral, sorry. And obviously that then triggers workflow their end. So it's joining back up that workflow between the two, between the sender and the receiver. There is a role switch here, as you'll see. So obviously the receiver now becomes the sender, and the sender now becomes the receiver. But it's obviously that's part and parcel of what this flow supports. And then also in the 999 to CAS use case, obviously the validation, the validation request. So 999 take a call for a Cat 3 or Cat 4, and they want a clinical assessment service to validate that. They send that to the validation, to the CAS service for validation, and that then is the validation response can then be sent back by that CAS to the 999 service to say yes or no, or it can even elevate the priority to a Cat 2, Cat or Cat 1, whatever, and it supports that level of detail of workflow. So yeah, it's supporting service discovery. We're supporting some of the principles of making sure that the receiver is dictating what's in that referral. We're then also supporting booking, referrals, and then this feedback response, this response level is a really important piece of the picture, really. And as I said, this all happens through the BARS API, the infrastructure through the BARS API, but equally it could potentially be technically be point to point. It's built with that in mind, but the intention at the moment is everyone works through the BARS API. I think that's probably it in terms of workflow. On to the next slide. Is there anything?
No, thank you, Carl. So we're going to just do, Julie's going to do a quick update on clinical safety, a few questions, and then a confirm break for 10 minutes. So Julie, on to yourself, please.
Hello there, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Good. Right, yeah, just a couple of slides on clinical safety. If you can go to the next slide, please, Barry. Now, obviously, there was a question around who's taking overall responsibility for the safety work on this. Obviously, it's a broad responsibility. As the deliverer of a standard, there's a requirement for us to comply with DCB 129, the clinical risk management application in the manufacture of health IT systems. Although it's not strictly a health IT system, we still have to comply with that. And we're doing work to do that. So we currently have a hazard log and a clinical safety case and a clinical risk management plan that we're working on. I'll talk a little bit more about how that looks on the next slide. But obviously we're working with suppliers who already will have clinical safety cases for their systems under DCB or 129, and they'll just be working to update those to include the functions that they're changing for BARS. And similarly with the service providers that we're working with, and they will already have clinical safety cases under their responsibilities for DCB 0160. So that's clinical risk management application in the deployment and use of health RT systems. So clinical safety officers within service providers will be updating their clinical safety cases to take into account of the new work that's using the BARS standard. Next slide, please, Barry. Now, as my colleague Dylan mentioned, obviously we're looking at bars as a product. So we have a core product, and we've been doing safety work against that core product. But really, unless you apply that core product to a use case, you can't really assess the severity and the likelihood of any clinical hazards, because obviously that varies depending on the clinical setting that you're in. So, largely, if a referral, for example, is delayed, the severity, the impact would be dependent on the acuity of the patient and also how long that delay was. So, for example, if it was an ambulance patient, that's likely to have a higher severity impact than it would be if it was a patient being referred to dental. So we're identifying the hazards at the core level, but then we're scoring them for each use case. So we'll be providing a clinical safety case report for BARS core, and then we'll probably do addendums, or rather than separate safety cases for each of those use cases, but there will be work done at each of those levels. Now, a lot of our controls are around obviously meeting the workflows that have been identified with engagement with stakeholders, the payload. We've worked closely with PRSB, who have obviously contacts in lots of different clinical forums and obviously in patient forums too. So we've had patient input into that payload as well. I know that was one of the other questions. And then when we identify the controls that we need to mitigate any of those hazards, they will be going to inform some of those documents that Carl talked to you about. So we would expect any kind of training controls to be going into implementation guidance, and assurance controls to be going into the SCAL, and any design controls going into the actual specification that we've worked on. So the first of type use cases that we've looked at, as we mentioned, are 111 to ED and 9 to CAS. And it's good that they're different use cases, because they're kind of given us a broader input to that. So when we're doing our systematic clinical safety analysis, we're being able to identify broader hazards and assign them to each of those use cases. So obviously, anybody who's done any clinical safety training will know that it doesn't really work if one of the organisations gets their safety work completed. It doesn't really work unless there's full collaboration. So we will be looking to collaborate with clinical safety officers from the suppliers that we're working with, and also from any of the service providers. Adnan will be providing you with our contact details subsequently, but I'm Julie Harris. I'm a BA and a clinical safety officer on the team, and my colleague Lee Montgomery is the clinical lead. So either of us would be very pleased to contact with you and work together so that we can make sure that this is an end-to-end safe product. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, and just to emphasise, we've got clinical at the core. So we've got two amazing people, Julie and Lee, that I call it keep us honest on the clinical side of it to make sure clinical's at the heart of it. But that, I think, as Will said, we're lucky we've got quite a multidisciplinary team from different backgrounds, so we've got a different approach on it. So Barry, if you can move to the next page, I've got some questions. We'll keep it short because I think the team have been whizzing around and answering all of them on Slido. But Mubashir Islam, I think you had a question saying, would there be a smaller and faster iterative trails rather than moving forward at large scale? So I think someone's answered it. So I think it's going to be different approaches. So where you've got something new and complex, we'll say ambulance handover to EDs is quite new. We'll probably do a first type think, review, and work out how we're doing. But where you've got a standard like 1-1 to pharmacy replacing ITK, that will probably be a quicker one where we do a first type, trial it, and then it can be rolled out at scale. So it will depend on the use cases where we want to be a bit slower or we want to be a bit faster. I'm hoping that's answered your question. Then we got, how does all the work fit into the ECDS work? So I don't know, Carl, could I bring you in? Carl or Dave, I think you've worked a bit on the ECDS work, haven't you?
We have, yeah. So we've been in discussions with colleagues working on the ECDS. At the moment, what we're doing and the data sets we're using, the information model we're using is based on the work we've done with PRSB. But we have had conversations with current ECDS and what's up and coming. So we are trying to align what our thinking with them. So obviously we don't go off complete tangents there. So it is being considered, it is being thought about, and I think it probably will need a change to some of the data that we send and consume. But yeah, there is alignment there, definitely.
Thanks, Carl. Just do one more question because it's relevant. So with someone, Ian's put, interesting that the response to a request is async. Does this pose challenges for 1129 referrals, or is it being reconsidered when you get the use case? So Julie, I know you're going to be the most knowledgeable on this. Could you answer that? And Julie, you might be on mute.
Sorry about that. Okay. Yes, we realise that when we start looking at the ambulance request, when ambulance request comes into bars, it will pose some additional challenges, which is probably one of the reasons why it's not one of the first of type use cases. But we do realise that that will be an interesting one. Yeah.
So thanks. As Jude said, we're looking at 999 to CAS, but the 11299 is further down the backlog.
So just to add though that we're already sort of thinking about that particular use case and how it might work, and I think I'm confident in the flexibility of bars in the way that we've designed it, that I think we'll be able to support those kind of super real-time messages that generally would favour a kind of synchronous pattern.
Cool. Okay, I'm just going to answer one quick question, then we'll take a break. So does bars work alongside data standards defined by the PRSB? So Will, you've probably been quiet for ages. What are we doing with PRSB?
Thanks, Adnan. Yeah, just turning off my mute. Yeah, so PRSB, we work quite closely with them all the way through so far, and we're continuing to work with them. They are going to continue to assure and I guess validate and then get endorsement for the standards that we're using. And then as we go into new use cases, we're going to either work with PRSB or another assurance body to continue to work with us to assure these standards.
Cool, thank you. So I think the team have been answering stuff on Slido, so I'm not going to go through every single question yet. We'll do some at the next break. So Barry, you want to go to the next slide? Okay, so I'm suggesting we all take a comfort break, tea, coffee, etc. So it's 12:07 now. Can we come back at 12:17, please? And you can leave your Zoom meeting on, put yourself on mute, and I'll see you back in 10 minutes. 12:17. We'll try to keep it on time. So Barry, could you move to the next section, please? And I'm going to introduce you to Richard. So Richard, again, amazing person, super clever. So he's our lead technical architect for the bars we're working. So any really difficult technical questions, I'm going to put you to Richard. So Richard, could you take over, please?
Yeah, sure. So brief video shot, prove I'm a real person, because most of the team don't believe I exist. And like Dave, my computer throws a wobble and the camera's on. So everybody will now choose the next slide and I'll go black again. Okay, hopefully you should see some nice pastel shaded boxes in front of you. This is the central architecture or the bars API as my colleagues have described earlier. And I'll give you a quick whistle-stop tour of what it is and a couple of questions that have come through and how it works. So in the center of the diagram, you can see we have the bars API. It's a centralized API with an inbuilt proxy that will allow send and receiver systems, people like yourselves, to talk to one another through the API, but as Dave said, without knowing the details of the target system, i.e. sender can talk to receiver without having to know who they are, where they are, don't need about firewalls, networking, transport, it's all taken care of. How it all works is keyed upon this concept of a service. So in this model, for first of type, we've got the DOS. And as you saw on Carl's presentation, the first thing we do is we figure out the service we're interested in. That's the clinical service, not a technical service. Once we've got the details of the service from the DOS, we can then pass that as part of the API calls. And what the API will do is it will go to a thing called the endpoint catalog, which you can see at the top of the screen, which contains the URLs that match the service details that have been chosen. And then the API will then figure out the routing, have a handshake with the receiver system, and pass the request on. So we support any-to-any through internal proxy, through a standardized API, where the two ends are completely abstracted from one another. They do not know anything about them at all. Can we move to the next slide, folks? So the platform itself is hosted on Apogee. It's part of the NHS Digital Standard platform, and for those that care, as part of Google. So it's well established, it's robust, it's safe. The API will be RESTful, apart from one small area where we're going to have to use probably a message-based paradigm for FHIR. But we can come to that a bit later. As I say, it's going to be built on UK Core's FHIR model, all standardized, all are for UK Core FHIR for payloads and following NHS guidance for the API structure. As has been mentioned before, it's fully accessible, it's internet facing, there's no need for HSCN or N3 as it used to be called. Basically, it's on the internet, you can get to it. It's secure. You are authenticated against the API platform using OAuth, private keys, and Java Web Tokens. As secure as you can get. And as I say, it's simple. Systems do not need to know the details of their recipient. You just simply make a call to the API with the service details you're interested in, and the API will figure out the rest for you. So much simpler than the current CareConnect model that uses SDS, LDAP, and things of that nature. Okay, next slide. This is a preview of what's coming. So you can see we've got a few more boxes on here. We've still got our senders and receivers. We've still got our API in the middle. We've still got the DOS at the bottom. But on the top left-hand side, you'll see the endpoint catalog's moved out to its own independent service. That's just an iteration of the design. And we have this concept of a registry. And the intention going forward is that registry will become a centralized registry of information in external systems. I know it's coming up in a further slide. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but basically it's a set of pointers to records that exist in external systems that allow third parties and senders to interact with that system about a booking that already exists without knowing the details of it. Again, it's an abstraction layer. Okay, that's me. So I think we're moving on to payloads now. So it's back to Carl and Dave. Okay, Carl, Dave.
Hi. Yes, sorry, I forgot I was going to speak for a bit on this, and then hand over to Carl. Barry, do you want to move forward this slide? So we've had a bit of a description of the transport layer, how you systems can communicate with each other. You can see that we've developed some centralized infrastructure as well that's there as optional supporting, facilitating stuff to help, particularly those national level or interregional services to meet their operational needs and to meet our requirements around or our principles around scalability and connect any to any, and not trying to sort of bake in necessary point-to-point configuration and things like that. So that's your transport layer. How systems talk, how you get from A to B, how two systems can one system can send information, one system can receive the information and respond appropriately. So let's talk about payloads. Now, one of the important principles in BARS, one of the enablers of being able to support a universal appointment booking and referral is how we've fully separated payloads from the transport layer. So I always sort of like to explain this in terms of like logistics, delivering packages. So what we've done with BARS is we've defined a very strict box and defined a very standard label that you can put on the box. It tells you where it needs to go. What we haven't done is standardized the content of the box. So what we've said is that the way you package it up, label it, put it on a van, drive it somewhere, gets delivered. That stuff is always the same. Whatever you're doing with BARS, it's always the same, consistent. So the way you're transporting the information, the way systems are talking to each other, always the same. But and what we believe is that with referrals, a primary distinction between different care settings is the information that's requirements, information needs for different flows. So referral to an emergency department, the information demands for that referral to happen, information that an ED needs to know in order to be able to accept that patient through their door. It's very different to a very complex scheduled referral to a very specific service like an imaging service or maybe some sort of outpatient clinic or something, where that actually to make that referral you need a very specific set of information. Certain tests have to be done, certain things have to be done, and so there's quite a the biggest challenge is accommodating this broad range of potential payloads. So that's why we've really standardized the transportation layer that enable dynamic, very flexible variations in the payloads to meet the needs of the individual applications. And Carl's going to sort of go on to, kind of describe how the payloads are built and how they, the examples, give some examples of how these work. But the key point is they're defined to meet the needs of each application. And they're primarily made up of bundles of FHIR resources. So I think we mentioned FHIR a few times. So the way we're encoding the information for transport is using FHIR. So the FHIR standard is the way in which this information is being packaged up, written down, and put into a sort of digitized form. So the way FHIR works in the form of resources. So you would have a collection of resources that are all interlinked. So such as an example would be a patient resource that would describe primarily the information about a patient, demographics and things. But you'd also have, for a referral, you might have a service request. For an appointment, you might have an appointment resource. And that would hold and tie together all the relevant information that's pertinent to that particular event. So we're using FHIR as a way of encoding information, transporting it, describing the payloads. And in terms of what the payloads can be, fundamentally, I mean, we're not constraining what the information that can be carried. So BARS isn't saying it's got to be this, it's got to be that. That will be defined by the needs of the particular application of the standard, the needs of the service that's receiving that referral. So they get to define this is information I need to be able to accept a referral. Now, we have placed an outer limit, an outer bound, if you like, on the contextual information. So not so much on any meta information that's used as part of transportation mechanisms. Some of those resources don't have to be defined anything more than the base FHIR definitions for those, but fundamentally the contextual information we're saying should be bounded by UK core. What we're saying is that if you need something that UK core doesn't accommodate, then we probably need to get it put into UK core first, because that's where it needs to be if it's a UK service. So we're working very closely with UK Core and developing UK Core to have the necessary resources included in it for our first few use cases, and that's an ongoing process. So that's kind of the sort of fundamentals of how we're approaching payloads. And what I'm going to do is hand over to Carl to go into a little bit more detail about how they're put together. So if you want to move on to the next slide, please, Barry, and I will hand over to Carl.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Barry. So again, as Dave just said, this kind of goes back to that one of those principles about the receiver dictating what needs to be included in that referral data, and that happens through the message definitions. So what these payload definitions and these ERDs, the entity relationship diagrams, are about. These are all on Supplier. These are supporting suppliers and understanding how these bundles are packaged up, what the relationships are, and what they mean. So people basically producing them or consuming them can kind of unpack them in the way they're intended. So this is a really important step, and obviously, as I said, getting the information there is one part of it, and then this processing of it is the next step, really. And in order to basically make this clear and explain this to people who are building on the ground, I mean, this is some of the documentation that we provide. So there's implementation guides around obviously the requirements for the particular use cases, and then this particular documentation on Supplier is all about the payloads and the bundles. So there will be these nationally defined message definitions, which are essentially the payload definitions that need to be built to support each of those use cases and each of those flows. And these diagrams and these definitions are supporting that. So what the diagram we're looking at on the right here is, that's essentially a bundle, and it's split out into all the different resources. I know that it's quite small here, so apologies for that. But the principle is showing you that you have, it's all contained within the bundle, and then you have something called the message header resource, and this is essentially dictates how to drive and unpack the resource and where the focus is, etc. The focus resource should be, and where it's come from, where it's going to. So that's the first step, and then obviously it builds out into all the different layers of that resource. So in this example, you've got the service request, and then it builds into the counter and everything that else is related to it. Can't really go into that level of detail here, but that's what it's trying to demonstrate to you. In addition, these entity relationship diagrams, they are showing state of the bundle as well. So we've provided these to suppliers, and I think they're proving useful. But it's indicating how the bundle looks on the sender side, so when it's generated, and then equally how it looks on the synchronous response from the receiver end. So when it's processed. So that's what the different colours are meaning. So that the green is what happens at the sender side, and the red is obviously what happens on the synchronous response side. So the level of detail here is intended to help understand how we want these bundles to be used and processed. And these are not used in isolation, as I said. These are used in conjunction with the other implementation guidance as well. But it's just the detail of what goes into the payloads is really key to the whole bar solution, and that's something that needs to be well understood and well documented, so the obviously solutions comply with how we intend this information to be used. But that's just it's an indication of what we provide, and as obviously you get into the detail of building these solutions, these will obviously make more sense, and obviously we can help you with the understanding there as well. I think I'll stop there because this does go into, obviously we can go into quite a lot of detail, but it's I know this is almost like a taster on a learnathon, so I will stop there. And I think we're going to questions next, are we?
Yeah, thank you, Carl. So first question is, this event is super useful, thanks, but is it a one-off? If not, what is the plans for future regular events? So Will, could you answer that? What can we do as a team?
Hi, Adnan. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, so we have regular show and tells internally with NHS Digital, and we also do updates regularly, and those are then available on the recordings are then available for people to watch afterwards. We are planning on following up this event with another event later in the summer. We haven't got a date yet, but we are looking to do a further event following this, which is going to be a hackathon. Details TBC, but that's going to be later on through the summer, as I said. We also plan on keeping our website updated regularly with the latest news that we've got as we progress through the standard, so people can keep an eye on that and see where we're at and see progress that we're making with that.
Cool, thanks, Will. And we have got a question at the end, how useful this event was or is. And my thoughts are, if people want more events, we could do something regular like this every so often as well. So I got another question now. So how does a BARS API know where to call for a service? How is that mapping configured? So Richard, could you cover that, please?
Of course. So everything's driven from the concept of a service, and every service will have a unique ID. And that unique ID will resolve within the API endpoint catalog to a unique endpoint that can then be invoked. So from a supply perspective, all you need is the service details and pass it to the API. It figures out the routing. There's also been a question about maintaining those APIs and endpoints. The plan is to be able to do that through the API or by the consumer systems themselves, again, calling the API to do self-management, which improves the current long process of ITK and other endpoints or bits and pieces. There you go.
Thank you. Then I've got a question from Ian saying, we would like to see NHS offer assurances that APIs will be made available for all existing future features. This has not been the case in the past. So Ian, I hope I can answer this question, and it does answer your question. So as a team, we've got a business case for the next 3-4 years to support developing BARS, the core application for many use cases. So the use cases are prioritized with colleagues in NHSE, D, wider, linked to policy and user needs, provider supplier needs. So the team will then work on different use cases. For each use case, what we're planning to do as part of our process is ask suppliers to support that first of type. So if you work on that use case and you want to support that first of type, come and speak to me. We'll get you working with us on that first of type. Once it's developed for that first of type, it'll be available for all other suppliers in their care settings to work against it. So, for me, if you want to work with us, please come and tell us how you can work with us, and we want to work with you. And suppliers who know me, I'm always knocking their door saying, come on, work with us. How can we help each other? So that's my attitude. We want to work with you as not as suppliers, as partners. So I had another, I want to say difficult question, so I'm going to answer it from Anonymous. What will be the implication if suppliers do not comply with the standard? There has not been previously, hence why EDI was needed and has been extended. So going through EDI was a necessary need to meet winter pressures 2 winters ago. Now, what I'm trying to do is call it hard levers, soft levers, what you want to call them. I'm trying to go with suppliers. What do they actually want? What is useful for suppliers? If we know what that is, build what they need. Also build what policy is needed. If we've got these policy and supplier needs and providers want to, we're actually building the right things. Now we have got some hard levers, and I call it ISNs. So we are working with the ISN team to make sure BARS has an ISN link to it, and it's on our website, and it says probably to be confirmed on it, but that's more like a hard lever. which I'm not really fond of. The team will tell you. I want to make sure that we're building it based on what policy needs. If that's what providers want and patients want, hopefully providers are telling their suppliers they want it. If we can make it really easy for you, you actually want to work with us. So I'm hoping that, you know, this is the way we can sort of like, you know, have standards used and adopted. I'm hoping, Anonymous, I covered that question for you. I'm going to pause a bit, maybe go to the next bit, because a lot of the questions are related to the next section, really. So Barry, could you move on, please? So we've got roadmaps. So Dave, can you tell us about all the exciting things we're going to be working on next?
Of course, Adnan, yes. So we've got a lot of grand ambitions for BARS, but it's important probably to state that we're it's still very immature. We're in the early days, and we've got a sort of multi-year plan for continual evolution of the standard, adding more capabilities, being able to support more complex flows, more complex workflows, more complex scenarios. So what we're doing immediately right now is just testing out some of our fundamental concepts and fundamental foundation technologies. And then we're going to layer in more and more capability and ability to support complexity. So in the kind of immediate, kind of short to medium term, we're particularly focusing on 3 core capabilities that we want to weave into this standard and offer. So our first immediate use cases, technically, they don't need these, although there's actually is additional benefit and enhancement by some of these capabilities. Fundamentally, we can achieve those workflows without these. So the first of the 3, which is literally the first, this is the one we are going to be putting in place in the very near future, is a endpoint catalog with rich APIs. So we've had a number of questions, I think, about this endpoint catalog. So we've developed a next generation endpoint catalog, and it's to fully support the way BARS handles the discovery of the technical endpoints, technical APIs. So we've designed the way we want these endpoints to work, the information that needs to be stored. We've actually modeled and created an information model for these endpoints. But the other thing we want to do, so initially we're implementing a kind of prototype endpoint catalog to support our first of types. So it'll work for the first of types, prove the principle. But then what we want to do is to build on that so that we can actually enhance it with a number of rich APIs. So what we envisage for this is that suppliers, for example, supplier systems could directly integrate with the endpoint catalog through an API, so that they can natively in their systems manage their own endpoints. So that's one way. Another thing we're looking at potentially, through the same APIs, that we may also develop a management portal, so you can manage APIs through, manage endpoints through that portal. We're not sure yet. Basically, this is the sort of thing we need to work with our supplier community to understand their needs, what they would like. But fundamentally, our vision for this endpoint catalog is that it's self-managed, self-service. So it'll be obviously appropriate security and access control in place. That's the idea. So there'll be a management suite of management APIs to support managing the information in it. And obviously, there's the APIs that are there to enable you to actually use the endpoints. So both the central BARS infrastructure, but also, in theory, the endpoint catalog could be exposed in its own right as well. so it could be used elsewhere. So reuse is really important. If we're building a new component, we want it to be reused as much as possible. Then the other capability that we want to put in place is a registry of pointers. So this is another quite powerful piece component. And so we recognize from a lot of our sort of previous work, we recognize that there's a real benefit in having a centralized single registry of information, limited information, that allows you to discover where there's existing bars events have happened and are relevant. Because there's a lot of workflows, particularly in the more national scale services, or the larger scale services that are crossing borders, that are services such as 999, 111, these types of things. They have they could get a patient into their service that will assess their needs, and the decisions they make may be different if they knew that that patient already had an active appointment or referral somewhere that's relevant to their problem that they've now contacted them about. And so it might be that things have changed and they want to maybe cancel that, or they want to do at least want to have access to that information. So the registry allows you to discover these things and allows you to go and ask for information about it. Whether you're allowed to have that information, that's a different matter, but it at least enables you to know that it exists and that you can go and ask for it. And if you're allowed to see it, then you would be able to then see that information. So we've got this concept of a registry of pointers. And the other one, which is one that's I'm particularly excited about, and is rather kind of a bit more longer term, although we're already starting some work on this, and is rather more ambitious, but looking forwards at some of the more complex referral flows that we need to support. Once you get into, I think Carl alluded to or mentioned, things like negotiated referrals, where it's not just a straightforward auto accept. There's actually a request that I want to refer the patient to you. But then there's a back and forth. Maybe there's a complex array of tasks that have to happen in order for that referral to be accepted, or maybe there's a clinician-to-clinician conversations that have to be facilitated and supported. So what we want to do is to put in place a workflow tasking and event notification platform. So it's got a number of different components. So for example, notifications. So we want to be able to, when something changes so you can subscribe to an event, and if something changes, or subscribe to a sort of something that's gone through bars. So for example, I don't know, maybe a GP might auto subscribe to every patient they have on their list. And so, if a patient gets referred through bars, they get a notification that says, yeah, your patient was referred to, went to the ED. And there's also, other things that we can use this model for. So currently we're actually doing some work with the ERS team on building out some capability around notifications and events. So we're already started some work in this area. Apologies, I'm starting to lose my voice. I'm recovering from COVID, so luckily I think this is the last thing that I'm talking about. So hopefully I can get to the end before it goes. One of the things I wanted to say about this is that the way we're kind of designing this and modeling this, we're thinking that all three will be based on a common persistence layer. So they'd actually be housed in a sort of common component tree. And what we're really quite sort of interested in and quite passionate about is that we want to model all this stuff in FHIR, because actually all these things can be modeled in FHIR. And so basically what we want to do is store FHIR objects natively. So we don't want to map them out into something else, some proprietary data model, data store. we're actually going to, we're going to look at solutions where we can store these FHIR objects natively. They're not mapped to something else; they're just stored as FHIR objects. And there's a lot of benefit and power to doing that. And it, it allows potentially also migration to, distributed systems, federated stores of these informations, and fundamentally what we want to do is have standardize around the information and the way it's structured and the way it's encoded and represented. So they're kind of the initial core capabilities that we see as necessary foundation blocks for enabling support of much greater complexity in the future, performing really complex chains of referrals that require tasks being spun off, and all sorts of potentially complex stuff. So we want to build in these foundations, start designing, developing them. So that's kind of the technology roadmap. I think we've already spoken about the applications that we've got a backlog of applications we want to start working on as well. So I think I'm going to hand over now to Barry and Carl, who are going to talk for a little bit about our approach to assurance, because this is always a very difficult subject. I think assurance can be a bit scary, particularly for suppliers. And again, we've got this sort of approach to assurance. We want to try and make it as friendly. Going back to that adoptability principle. Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Barry and Carl. I'm not sure who's going first.
Yeah, it's me. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, so assurance, as Dave said, maybe a bit scary, but I mean it's necessary evil, really. So this is really our quality assurance level. Obviously, it's ensuring that what's built actually meets what we've dictated in the standard, and obviously it's safe to go through to production. So it's different levels as well. So there's obviously workflow. It's checking workflow. There's a nod to clinical safety. Obviously, we're not taking on clinical safety for deployed solutions, but we have our own clinical safety, and there's a nod to it in anything that's built. And then obviously technical conformance and information governance as well. So they're all covered within this assurance steps. So things that we need to go through. As dictated before, we have lowered the barrier of entry. We want to basically make this as accessible as possible, but we also need to maintain the quality. So there's a balance to be had there. Part of what we're doing, obviously, we're supplying tools that help with this. So there is a toolkit workbench tool that is being developed in conjunction with what the first type suppliers are building now, and that will basically help support anyone building subsequently with bars. It kind of helps guide the development process by checking what's being built already and providing detail about what might be wrong, etc. But then it also creates validation reports, and they can be used as evidence in what we're coming on to now, which is the SCAL. So this is the actual document and the main meat of what assurance is for us. So it is a supplier conformance assessment list. It's a document with Barry will go on to kind of show you in a minute, but it's a document that basically covers over those steps I've highlighted above about workflow, technical performance, etc. And it's intended to kind of test and ensure that what's being built does meet that standard. It's really a checklist, as it says there, a checklist that you basically sign up to saying you support, and then you provide evidence to dictate how you conform to it, etc. So that's what it principally is. There's some variation with this. Obviously, bars is a little bit different to some other solutions in terms of the variation of requirements and how it links with the products. So there is the core, the bars core, that everyone will have to build to and assure to, as I think Dylan said before. And then on top of that, there's the particular requirements for each bars application. So this document will kind of outline that and provide evidence. You will build on a core and then a per application basis, technically. There are other steps in this as well, and I mean, this is not the only thing that will form part of the assurance. There's also the path to live. So if you're not managing to get on path to lives, obviously you won't be assured. You need to get onto the environment, the integration environment, and that's where the suppliers test with each other. So that's a key step in part of the assurance process. You'll also demonstrate end-to-end solutions on there as well. And then in addition to that, we have APIM onboarding. So there's that platform, that NHS platform I mentioned. So it is APIM, as Richard mentions, it's the Apogee platform. So there's onboarding steps onto that, and you'll cover that off as part of the steps on path to live, then into production as well. And then finally, when what we do with our solution assurance team, who basically manage all this really for us, the internal team, after that's all signed off and it's agreed that the solution kind of conforms, then its technical performance is signed off, and at that point, and only at that point, can you move into production. So I think Barry's going to go through in detail what some of those steps look like. Is that okay, Barry?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. So as both Carl and Dave mentioned, we've tried to keep a real lightweight touch to this assurance process. Certainly not anything like CAP or any other lengthy assurance process that you might have been through in the past. So here I've highlighted where the assurance task sits within the BARS development cycle, and below that a high-level overview of the process. So after development's finished and the environments have all been set up, the first step of assurance will be INT testing with other suppliers. So that's using a sandbox environment, and that's basically testing the supplier's code end to end. The evidence from that INT testing will then be used to complete a SCAL spreadsheet. We'll then work with the supplier to check the contents of that SCAL, go back with any corrections if needed. We're saying on average it probably takes 2 to 4 weeks maybe to complete the SCAL, make corrections and sort of go back and forth with the supplier and NHS Digital to get it correct. And then also as part of the SCAL, there's a requirement to demonstrate or do an end-to-end test so that we can see the process actually working within the supplier's system rather than just the code. And then also part of the SCAL, you need to provide a TKW validation report. So once all that's done, been submitted and the SCAL's complete, it will be signed off, and then the supplier will be ready to move on to the deployment section. So on this slide, rather than go through the SCAL sort of full document line by line, so there's quite a lot on there, I've broken it down into the respective tabs on the spreadsheet, and a high-level example of what could be contained in each tab. Obviously, these tabs will be dependent on whether you're doing booking or referring or sending or receiving or any mixture of them. So the first tab on the spreadsheet is supplier information. So that's related to the supplier. So for example, their IG information, any security things, clinical safety officers and clinical safety processes, and also their service management plan. Then moving on to architecture. In there, it's all about IT, ops planning, and information regarding the supplier's architecture in there. And then the last 4 tabs, they're sort of the meat of the SCAL really. And you fill them in depending on whether you're doing sending and receiving or booking and referring. And they kind of ask for examples of code, payloads, how they're validated, and how the supplier might be handling requests or handling errors, for example. Obviously, the spreadsheet's a lot more detailed than what's on here, and we could certainly send through a copy to anyone that would like to see the full spreadsheet. But yeah, really the main things to take away from this, we've tried to make it as light touch as possible, and we're basically here to help you through each stage of this process and filling in the SCAL and getting signed off. So I think I'm now going to hand back to Adnan.
Thank you, Barry. So we're just going to catch up with a few questions that we've got. So don't know why it's. Oh, go to the next one. We'll just come back to it. So I'll just go through some of the questions we had. So how are you working with patients to work out what information they are comfortable giving as part of a referral? So I think we're doing some interesting bits. So I think Susan from Clearer Systems, do you want to come in and explain what you're doing with patients really?
Hi, yeah. So as part of our quality improvement program, we've onboarded a patient representative. And what we do with working with that patient representative is explaining all of our patient journeys as we go through, and then gathering their feedback to understand exactly how they want that journey to look like as a patient. We've already had some help from patients with our automated courtesy calling, where they've said, you know, they don't want text messages if they're not informative. They don't just want one to say we're busy, because they kind of know that. So we've been working very closely with them recently on all of those flows. And obviously with bars being a priority within our development, we're now including them in those discussions. So we could ask our patient rep the questions on what information would they be happy to be shared, etc.
Thanks, Susan. So that's useful to know. And yeah, so it's really good that suppliers are actually engaging with patients. We as a central team are looking to get some patient reps working with us directly. So Barry, if you go to the next slide. So we've got our email address there and our website for people to do it. I'm just going to check Slido now. I think we've answered most questions. I'm just trying to look at any questions we haven't replied to. Got a question from Ian where it says, would love to learn more about fire encounters, part of the definition and how we link up. So Dave, I don't know if you can pick that up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think happy to work with you, Ian. I feel like we might even have a catch up tomorrow.
Yeah, I think we've got a call tomorrow, Dave. So
yeah, so we'll definitely talk. Yeah, we'll talk about it. But encounters is one of the sort of a key part of most payloads, I would expect. So yeah, we can talk about that tomorrow.
Thank you.
Another one of Dave, while keeping on, is saying, is bars going to be cross-national and international boundaries?
Wow. Yeah, I'd love to take over the world, eh? So national boundaries. So one thing we are doing, so as part of our work with UK Core, we are working with the other home nations, and they're very interested in bars and what we're doing with bars and how it works. And so we are collaborating with the other home nations actively. And so being based around UK Core, I think it will, should hopefully, we want it to be at the very least applicable and that it would work across all the home nations. And there are some significant differences between how certain things are done in the different home nations. Internationally is an interesting question. I mean, certainly that's not currently on our an immediate concern. I think small steps, as I said, we're still very immature as a sort of program and as a standard. But absolutely, I think we would be very keen to kind of participate in any international forums and and to share what we're doing and to hear about how this sort of thing is maybe being tackled elsewhere. So I think that's probably all we can say on that.
Thanks, Dave. I think just for the audience, so I think with the team have answered every single question more or less. And what we'll do is part of our feedback is we'll have the question and answer, and then we'll send it back out to everyone so you got a copy of the answer. But Slido will remain open so you can actually look at people replying to each of the questions. So Barry, could you go to the next one? So it said, would you support a first type for a new use case? So it's split into supplier and provider. So supplier, yes, I'm super excited. Where do I sign up? Or not at the moment. Or I'm not a supplier, not interested. And I'm not a supplier, I'm a provider, a trust. I'm really interested, I want to be involved. So could you just access your keyboards and that's going to give me a taste about how many people, if we've pitched this session right. We'll give it about 30 seconds or so. Okay, that's great. I think a lot of people are super interested. So team, we are going to have a busy year working with everyone. So which is really good. So Barry, could you go on to the next one, please? So it's got, what do you want from a hack event? So we talked about this earlier, is that we're looking at doing a potential face-to-face event. Probably we'll try to do it before summer or just after summer. So this is where we'll actually physically meet, which will be great. They need to be confirmed, and mainly for suppliers is that you can actually develop against some of our APIs. So that could be doing some API onboarding. It could actually be doing where we do some smaller sessions, looking at our website with Natalie, to look at our website and making sure that's optimized for suppliers. So, if you do want to attend a hack event, what do you want from the hack event? So could you spend a bit of time thinking about what you want to do? I think whoever wrote beer or food, probably, that's probably definitely something we should do. And again, you should be able to just, okay, so access tooling, technical demo, interaction demo. So yeah. So Dave, get your thinking cap on. And we'll work out how we can make this a reality, really.
It's always on, Adnan, don't worry.
It's great. So Barry, if you go to the next one, and this is just some feedback, really. So describe it in one word, how you found this event. So how did you find the event? How were the presenters, the speakers, everything done? Okay, ignore that we had technical issues at the start of the session, which we do apologize for. But please spend some time to, if it wasn't that good, just say, I'll never attend again, which is fine. I won't take it personally, but please give us some feedback because it helps us shape our next event. Okay, so getting some really good feedback. Yeah, I can see where we probably need to do a bit more dialogue two-way. Yeah, take that on board. And I'm hoping that when we do the face-to-face event for the hack side of it, that's where we can just do a bit more dialogue on it. I think the team and I have struggled to try to work out how much to put into 3 hours without making it a whole day event. But thank you so much for the feedback. So Barry, if you can move on. So I just want to say thank you, Helen. I don't know if you want to come back on. So I know you've organised everything in the background.
On behalf of the INTEROPen community, it's wonderful to help host these learning sessions. We hope that this is, you know, a nice springboard for a lot more collaboration and communication around the Bookings and Referral Standard. And if anyone wants to sort of keep up with the conversation between now and the hackathon, our collaboration platform River is a good place, and there'll be links to the resources that have been used here. There'll be an early link to the recording, the unedited recording, which I'll also be sending out via email. And then once it's been edited and split up into sessions, etc., will be posted on the INTEROPen YouTube page. If you are not already a member of INTEROPen, I'll post a link in the chat to join so that you can access our collaboration platform. And I'll also post a link to our INTEROPen channel on YouTube as well. And for future events, just follow us on the Eventbrite page as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and echo what Helen said. Yeah, I'll say thank you, everyone. So thank you for spending the last 3 hours with the Booking Referrals team. And thank you for my team for writing all the slides. And have a good day. Go get some lunch, some tea, and have a wonderful week. Thank you all, and goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Really good.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks.
Cheers.